Beauty and its Social Implication, a TOK presentation by Cindy Osei. Beauty is everywhere. We see it in nature, in space, in people, even in the strangest of places. It is no wonder then that beauty plays such an important role in how people form judgments about the people and things around them. With this in mind, my presentation focuses on beauty and the social implications that can be derived from how we view and define it. So to begin, my real life situation stems from me chilling and watching Disney's 1966 film, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. For all those who don't know about this movie, it is basically about a 15th century French gypsy girl who is framed for murder and is saved by a deformed bell ringer of Notre Dame Cathedral. One of the main focuses of the film is the theme that a person cannot be judged by their looks or appearance. Quasimodo, who is the bell ringer, is physically disfigured and not necessarily pleasing to the eyes as you can see in the photo. However, Esmeralda, the gypsy, considers Quasimodo to be beautiful, both physically and internally. While this theme is typical of Disney, especially evident in films such as Beauty and the Beast, the film got me really thinking, is beauty truly in the eye of the beholder? I mean, we all know this famous quote, and it's something that we use a lot, but to what extent does this really hold true? Do we all have our own ideas of what constitutes beauty? Or is there something more than this subjective idea of this beauty? This led me to the knowledge question. To what extent can the perception of one's beauty be justified as a subjective rather than an objective evaluation? First, let's break down the knowledge question. I define beauty as any physical quality that appeals to aesthetics. Take notice of the red words because it will be important in how I frame my knowledge question later on. Continuing perception, I define as the process of perceiving something through the senses. I limit my scope to the sense of sight in this case. Justified as to prove or show something to be reasonable. Objective defined as beauty as a collective universal idea, evaluation, and opinion on the nature, character, or quality of something. So now that I've broken down my knowledge question, let's move on to my first development, which explores beauty as subjective. The first development deals with emotion, sense perception, and memory as ways of knowing. Sense perception because the person uses his or her senses to evaluate whether the object is beautiful or not. Emotion because the person connects his ideas of beauty to his or her emotions. An example of this is a mother thinking that her newborn baby is the most beautiful creature on earth because of the overwhelming love that she feels for her baby. And finally, memory because the person uses his or her prior experiences and knowledge to alter his perception of what is presently beautiful. So my first claim defending that beauty is subjective is that beauty is defined only by an individual's personal evaluation, and there are no objective standards to judge beauty by. So basically, beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. We all have our personal opinions of what we consider to be physically beautiful, and we all experience beauty differently, right? So two people can consider one thing to be beautiful, but they may interpret different aspects of that one thing to be beautiful. My claim is primarily based off of Hume's beauty perception. Briefly, David Hume was a Scottish historian and philosopher primarily known for his radical philosophical empiricism and skepticism. And here he states, beauty is no quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty. So basically, Hume states that beauty exists in our mind, and we all have our own different subjective and unique perceptions of beauty. So, what I may consider beautiful, another may consider ugly, or what I may consider beautiful, another person may also consider that same thing beautiful too, but for an entirely different reason. So the real life situation that I derive from this claim is the sculpture shown below, and it is called Le Pouce by Cesar Baldaccini, who is an infamous Italian artist. The sculpture you see here of a finger is overwhelmingly branded by many people as one of the ugliest art in the world. Well, I guess they are right in a way, because who wants to see a gigantic sculpture of a wrinkled fingernail in the middle of a city? But if we analyze this closely, we can see the different sides of the sculpture. The artist may consider his work to be beautiful, while the audience may consider his work to not be very pleasing to the eye. This shows the subjective nature of beauty. What one may consider beautiful, another may consider completely ugly. Two people may also consider the sculpture to be beautiful, but for very different reasons. I, for one, consider the sculpture to be beautiful, particularly because of its intricate details and lines, while another may consider it to be beautiful maybe because of its grandiose size and asymmetrical proportions. This just goes to prove Hume's perception of beauty and shows that beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. A counterclaim to this, however, is that an individual cannot restrict the definition of beauty to only his or her own personal evaluations. One cannot claim to know beauty without knowledge of a universal standard of beauty. There are standards of beauty that coincide universally, thus indicating that there are more than subjective implications of beauty. And the claim here is based on James Curran, who was another prominent philosopher, specifically known for his composition Reflection of Beauty. And here he states, though different persons can of course differ in particular judgments, it is also obvious that our judgments coincide to a remarkable extent. It would be odd or perverse for any person to deny that a perfect rose or dramatic sunset was beautiful. Here Curran argues that although we have our own individual tastes and judgments of what we consider beautiful, our judgments as a whole of beauty may not be that different. So the real life situation that I have extracted here is simply the plant that we know as a rose. As Curran said, it is hard for us to deny the beauty of a rose. If your girlfriend or boyfriend were to give you a rose, the first thing you will probably say is, "Oh, it's beautiful." A rose isn't generally known as beautiful to one specific geographical area, maybe with the exception of cultures who see the rose as an evil or hideous thing, but to many parts of the world, there's an overwhelming consensus that a rose is a beautiful plant. There seems to be a collective, universal knowledge about the beauty of a rose. Similarly, we have shared knowledge of standards of beauty that coincides with one another. We associate sunsets as beautiful, or even specific characteristics of people relative to an area as beautiful. The rose example shows that there are greater implications of beauty than subjective definitions, thus implying that beauty may not be absolutely subjective. So, the knowledge question derived from this development is, to what extent do we marginalize people who do not like socially accepted ideas of beauty when we apply standards to it? For the rose example, there may be people who do not see a rose as beautiful. So how do we account for these people in the counterclaim? We'll keep this in mind. Moving on, The second development explores beauty as objective. Here we are going to be looking at reason, intuition, and language as a way of knowing. Reason because the person uses reason to evaluate universal standards of beauty and associate the object to those standards. Intuition because each person feels like he or she has an instinctive understanding of what is beautiful. And language because humans use language to communicate their ideas of beauty and create a universal consensus of what beauty is. Thus, beauty in this case is a shared knowledge through the use of language. In this development, I also explore mathematics and the human sciences as an area of knowledge. So, my first claim defending that beauty is objective and is defined by universal standards is that one does not attach an emotion to an object and then define it as beautiful, but rather is influenced by universal and objective ideas of beauty. It is until then that the person intuitively knows that the object is beautiful. So basically, beauty is objective because of the universal standards we have for beauty. Here I use the golden ratio as an example, which in mathematics is a special number approximately equal to 1.618, and it applies to the objectivity that is described in the claim above. In terms of physical beauty, the golden ratio can be an objective measure to determine the degree of beauty of an object. So, my real life situation from this development is a site called Anaface. And with Anaface, an individual can upload a picture and the site will calculate the symmetrical proportions of the person in the picture and score them based on categorical points. Here I use two examples of a boy with a mugshot picture who has committed a law offense and a picture of Ian Somerhalder, who is an actor prominently known for his role in the show Vampire Diaries. Now, if we look at the score of the mugshot boy, we see that he has a beauty score of 5.39, right? And if we look at Ian Somerhalder, we see that he has a facial beauty score of 8.39, 5.99 out of 10. And I found this interesting because the site truly provides an objective way of measuring what is beautiful, right? The site did not apply emotion into its calculation. However, it only used the laws of mathematics and the golden ratio to calculate what it considers to be beautiful. So, from this, we see that um, if we really analyze this further, we also know that the site did not really consider the fact that Ian Somerhalder is a well-known actor and he's part of the show drama. He's part of the show The Vampire Diaries. And also the site did not take into account that the picture of the guy here is a person who has committed a law offense. So we can see that here, by the golden ratio being predominantly the standard measure of beauty, we can find an objective measure to which we can measure what constitute as beauty or not without attaching emotions and our own personal evaluations of the object that we are dealing with. A counterclaim to that, however, is that there's no humanity attached to the idea of beauty being completely objective. This suggests that objects can be beautiful without anyone labeling them as such. So basically, while we do have universal standards of beauty such as the golden ratio and symmetrical proportions, there is no humanity attached to this idea because anything can be considered beautiful without humans applying them as such. Thus, objectivity defines aesthetics as a branch of philosophy which deals with the labeling and appreciation of beauty. Below it states, beauty is only a concept defined and labeled by humans. Therefore, without aesthetics, beauty does not exist. This means that although we may have objective measures of beauty, there is no value to it until humans subjectively label the objects as beautiful. As a result, beauty does not exist until it is labeled specifically by a human. And my real life situation extracted is a YouTube video by a person named as BuzzFeed Yellow, and the name of the video is Beauty Standards Around the World. Okay, so in the video, we see a woman who takes a raw picture of herself and allows it to be photoshopped by various countries. We see the different definitions that take place in the video. Regardless of whichever country the picture is photoshopped, there were some standards of beauty that coincide. For example, each photoshopped picture is blemish-free, bounded by symmetrical features, and has a youthful complexion with highlighted features. These are the universal and coincidental standards of beauty, and the shared knowledge of what makes something beautiful. However, we also see subjective standards of beauty pertaining to each individual's country. For example, the woman in the Germany Photoshop picture was significantly lighter than her original self, whereas the woman in the Philippines Photoshop picture hair became straightened, reflecting her country's belief that hair is desired as far from the natural curl as possible. Although we saw the universal standards of beauty, which are symmetrical faces, blemish-free, youthful skin, these universal/objective standards did not really give the video much value. The real appeal of the video, at least for me, came from the subjective nature of the video, and how each country's idea of beauty differ from one another. With this in mind, the knowledge question derived here is, to which extent are humans necessary in defining the concept of beauty? So, can beauty really exist without humans labeling it as such? We finally then move on to the last development, which explores beauty as both subjective and objective. And we are going to look at all the previous ways of knowing and areas of knowledge when taking into account this exploration. My claim is that beauty must be both subjective and objective, as neither stands as an absolute definition on its own. So, this is based off of Crispin Sartwell, who's an American philosopher, anarchist, and journalist. He has Sartre states that when we attribute beauty to the night sky, for instance, we do not take ourselves simply to be reporting a state of pleasure in ourselves. We are turned outward toward it. We are celebrating the real world. On the other hand, if there were no one capable of experiencing such things, there would be no beauty. Beauty rather emerges in situations in which subject and object are juxtaposed and connected. Yet Sartre argues that while there are subjective definitions of beauty, there are also objective and universal standards. He also asks the importance of humanity labeling beauty and the subjective nature that applies to beauty. So a counterclaim to Sartre's argument is that we cannot combine a subjective and objective definitions of beauty as it contradicts one another. So for this example, I use in psychology the illusion of explanatory depth to explain this. So here it says that in illusion of explanatory depth, we tend to find answers that serves as placeholders and grasp concepts that we don't necessarily understand. So to combine the two definitions of beauty as beauty being both subjective and objective is a paradox and reveals gaps in our knowledge. So before this counterclaim deals with the fact that we can't just say that beauty has both subjective and objective definitions to it, because it shows a dissonance, a gap in our thinking. And my last real life situation, centers on the debate that we had in my philosophy class, which deals with the division between the mind and the body. In the debate, Mahendra and Nick were known as physicalists, and they argued that anytime we have gaps in our knowledge and can't seem to explain something, we find a placeholder to gloss over our incomplete knowledge. They use God as an example of a placeholder, and that's because we haven't perceived a being beyond God. We use God as a placeholder to fill in our knowledge gaps. This coincides with the illusion of explanatory depth. Because we can't come to conclusive definitions of beauty as either subjective or objective, we use the paradox of beauty being both as a placeholder to fill in the gaps in our knowledge. This begs the knowledge question: at which point do humans strive for congruity in their minds? So, with this knowledge question in mind, I reach my conclusion. I argue that beauty has both subjective and objective elements. So we have universal and cultural ideas of beauty. However, we are we also all uniquely and individually perceive beauty differently. So, if we go back to my original real life situation, which is Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, we see that beauty really is in the eye of the beholder, because we all see things as beautiful in different ways. However, there are objective implications that need to be considered. When we apply both definitions of beauty in a subjective and objective sense, we create a paradox, and this can reveal gaps in our knowledge. Finally, the importance of this presentation is to reveal the complexity of our everyday knowledge. I mean, we all know our own individual taste of what we find beautiful or what we don't consider necessarily pleasing to the eye. But most of us never really truly consider the complex ideas that pertains to the simple word that we know as beauty. So, as we move on from this presentation, we can try to understand more about the different definitions that attribute to the word beauty, and understand how beauty play a role in how we form judgments about the people and the things around us. The